In this series of lessons, we're going to introduce database functionality into our Flask applications. And to do that, we're going to build a basic to-do app, an app that can keep track of tasks that we want to complete. That's, so this, the type of app that's frequently used and very common. And we're going to do that using a chunk of code we wrote in a previous lesson when we were looking at using templates and handler functions within Flask back in classes 3, 4, 5, 6, somewhere along those lines. So this first lesson is actually just going to be setting up the project that we want to work with. We're going to do this in a new project instead of our Hello Flask project, which we're using as kind of a sandbox. This will be done in a brand new project. And so this first video is just going to be some of the setup. We won't actually touch any of the database stuff quite yet. So just for practice, I encourage you to walk through the setup steps with me. I'll also post the link to the GitHub repository for this stuff, so you can clone that repository if you wish to just have the setup be done for you. But it's always good practice, so let's just go ahead and go through it together. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is make a directory for this project. I'm going to call it Get It Done. So let's make dir for that project, and then let's jump down into that directory. And then the first thing I always do when I make a new project directory is to initialize a Git repository within that directory. Okay, so we have a new empty Git repository in our directory. And now I want to just go ahead and start bringing over the pieces of code from that previous project that I had worked with into this one. So I'm going to need to have a main.py file, and in order to have a place to put them, so let me create an empty main.py file and then open that up in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so let me go back to my Hello Flask directory because I just want to copy paste a few pieces of code that we've already written over there. So I'm going to open up that project in Visual Studio Code as well. And let's see, and for my main.py file, I want to go down to the bottom here and I want to grab basically this stuff down here. This was the little bit of code that we used in order to display the to-do form and then also the list of to-dos that we created. So I'm going to get that and bring it over and drop it in here. Okay, now I just need to build up my Flask application around this. So the things that we need are from Flask, import Flask. We also need request and redirect and render template. I believe that's the full list of items we use. Let me check that. Request, redirect, render template. That is indeed the case. So I need those pulled into my file. Then I need to go ahead and create an app. So let me say app equals Flask _name. And then we have some settings that we're going to set up. The first one will be app.config debug equals true. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's see. I'm going to rename this function, this handler function, to just be index, since it's going to be the index view of my new app. And then down at the bottom, I can say app.run. Let's see if there's anything we missed here. Let me just scan back at this file. We're not going to need the CGI or OS modules in this case. And okay, that looks good for our main.py file. I used some templates though. Notice I used the to-dos template, and the to-dos template extended the base.html template. So let me bring those templates over to this application as well. So I'll first create my templates directory. And then within that, I'll create a todos.html and base.html. And then I'll go get the contents of those two files from my previously built code. Okay, I think it looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and change the name of our application in this H1, since we're calling this one Get It Done. And let me just kind of briefly scan this and make sure I think everything looks okay. I don't think there's anything we've left off here. I can change the title here when I'm rendering that template. And I think that should all work. So recall the way that this worked is that we set up an empty list as a global variable when our application first loads. And then this index handler, this will handle both post and get requests to the given URL. Let's actually fix that URL. Let's just make this the root URL since our app is going to be just a to-do list app. And if the request method is post, then we get something called task out of the request. That's going to be submitted from a form with an input that has name equals task. And I append that to the list of tasks right here. And then in both cases, I just re-render that view using the title and the tasks. And then within that view in the template, we have the form at the top. And then below it, we have code that checks to see if any tasks exist from the past in tasks list. If not, it renders a no tasks yet message. Otherwise, it goes ahead and creates an unordered list of tasks to display. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. Let's go ahead and do one or two more things before we get ready to run this. I'm going to go ahead and make a git ignore file for this project. So actually, that's in the wrong directory. Let me do it. There we go. I almost created it in the templates directory, which would have been incorrect. And the few things that I'm just pretty much always going to add to the git ignore for a Python project. One is some of my app-specific and operating-specific files. So the VS Code directory that gets created, we want to ignore that. We also want to ignore the DS store. This is for Mac app people that are working on Macs. That's a hidden folder or hidden file rather that will be created by the Finder application. And then I also want to ignore all .pyc files. So these are files that are generated by running Python applications. Okay, so we've got our git ignore. And then let's just go back to the terminal and do a git status. All right, that looks pretty good. So before I actually commit this, I just want to make sure it runs. Don't want to check in any broken code. And before I can run it, recall that I need to activate a virtual environment. So for this, I'm going to use the virtual environment that we've been using for the last little bit. That's called Flask Env. So I'm going to source, activate, Flask Env. And we see there that we have the virtual environment activated for us. And now I can just try to run Python main.py. Okay, that looks pretty good. So luckily we didn't introduce any typos or mistakes in that, at least so far. And then I'll come back to my browser, load this, and hopefully we get the same view. That looks pretty good. Let's try it out. Let's make a form post. Okay, so I added one new task, another new task, and so on. So that all looks good. If I come back and just reload my page, my tasks are still there. Okay, great. So last thing we need to do before we can end this setup portion, I'm going to kill the application and go ahead and commit everything to Git. All right, just put a nice descriptive Git message there and go ahead and commit, and we're good to go. So now we're all set up with this new application that we can build off of, and in the next 3 lessons, we'll add database functionality to make this data that we generate by creating to-dos actually be able to be stored in a database. So that's the topic of our next lessons.